So here's three quarterbacks I'm looking to drop heading into week 11. The first guy's Jared Goff. I had high hopes, and many fantasy owners did also. But Goff, he didn't have a good fantasy game at all. Only 10 fantasy points with 302 yards, but they just couldn't punch it in the end zone with the receivers. Darrell Henderson and Brown with 2 red zone touchdowns. So that took the production away from Goff. They beat Seattle pretty handedly in this one, 23-16. But Goff, again, another game where he don't even reach 20 fantasy points. So now in 3 out of his last 4 fantasy games, he didn't reach 20 fantasy points as Goff. So Goff, he's out there owned in 79% of leagues, and now he's got Tampa Bay coming up. So he's a guy I'm going to try to get away from. In most of these waiver videos, I like the weapons, but I just don't like Goff. He's not getting the touchdowns. The production's down. The fantasy points haven't been great this whole season, but he's owned in 80% of leagues, but I would drop him. The next guy is Drew Lock, another guy I had in my top 15, but Lock was a disappointment, and he's a guy you just can't trust at all. 8 fantasy points for Lock, 257 yards, 4 intos, a touchdown, 2 rushes for 7 yards. Lock, you can't trust him. He had a pretty good matchup versus Vegas. We know he delivered versus Atlanta in Week 9 and the Chargers in Week 8, but this week he was a horror show versus Vegas, and he's a guy owned in 23% of leagues. I'm expecting that to go down. So yeah, Drew Lock, unless you're in a 2-quarterback league or something, this is the time to drop him, so drop him. And the third and final guy is Carson Wentz. I used him in a spot start for Patrick Mahomes, and he was horrible. 208 yards, 2 rushes for 4 yards. Wentz, he just couldn't find the open man. He was throwing the ball erratically all over the field. He wasn't accurate. You thought Wentz would have a decent game with Jeffrey coming back, Rager another week healthy, and Goddard, but he just couldn't get the job done. I can't trust him. He had a plus matchup, and now 2 weeks in a row, bad games Wentz had versus Dallas with the 4 turnovers, and then in this game, just doing nothing versus the Giants with 9 fantasy points. So it's time to get away from Wentz unless you're in a deep league, but leagues 10 to 12 regular format. You got to cut this guy. He's owned in way too many fantasy leagues at 78%. After not showing up in this matchup versus the Giants, I got no confidence that Wentz would do anything great the rest of the season, even though he's got a good matchup in Cleveland and then Seattle. But still, I cannot trust this guy. So that's 3 quarterbacks I'm going to drop heading into Week 11.